Western Ag Network on the road in Grand Junction, Colorado for the Public Lands Council annual meeting, brought to you by Ag Risk Advisors.
Well, hi everybody, it's time for On the Road. This week we're in beautiful Grand Junction, Colorado for the Public Lands Council's annual meeting. By the way, our coverage this week is brought to you by our friends at Ag Risk Advisors, providing important risk management tools for America's farmers and ranchers. You can learn more by visiting agriskadvisors.com. Well, joining us first thing out of the chute today is Mark Roeber, the Public Lands Council's president from Paonia, Colorado, just down the road from here in Grand Junction, Mark. And thank you so much for being with us here on the Western Ag Network and inviting us to the west slope of Colorado. Talk about the importance, though, of this week's PLC annual meeting.
Well, at this week's meeting, Russ, and little correction there, we're up the road. We're actually up the road from Grand Junction. Grand Junction is lower in elevation. I live up at about 6,000 feet. This is about 4,000 something, so no big deal there. But no, we're here gathered here and to try and develop policy and a plan to move forward. I mean, a lot of our talk this morning has been about transition uh, within our own leadership, but then we're trying to figure out where we're going to go nationally. And with the presidential election, and we've got to be prepared to really go with the flow, if you will, because there's probably going to be some major changes one way or the other. And as public lands ranchers, I always like to talk about how the real key to ranching is improvise and adapt. So at Public Lands Council, that is what we kind of major in, is improvising and adapting. And so that's kind of our talk today. And we're trying to develop policy to, promote public lands ranching, protect it into the future generations. And, we just want to continue a big education process about how important it is to the United States of America to have that sovereignty of food.
Yeah, well said. Now, Mark, a big component of multiple use, which includes livestock on these federal lands, is NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. And I know that PLC has been very active in the NEPA process and recent reviews of NEPA and making sure NEPA is used correctly so that livestock remain part of that federal landscape.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And we don't we all like to cuss NEPA, but we really don't have anything against NEPA. It's how it's implemented and how it's used. And we have no problem with saying, all the impacts need to be analyzed. But it has become a tool that is just, it's impossible to mitigate for the agencies. And so it's become a obstructionist tool. And we need to get back to simplifying it, doing what it was intended to do, really analyze impacts and move on. We need to be able to act on those issues and not just have it stuck in an obstructionist move.
Reforming the Endangered Species Act has also been a big priority for groups like Public Lands Council, like the NCBA, like the American Sheep Industry Association, and so many others, and it still is. But unfortunately, this spring, one of those species that has been in the crosshairs of animal activists out there has been the sage grouse out here in the West, and BLM came out with some new management ideas for the sage grouse, and I know you guys at PLC are working as hard as you can to keep the sage grouse off of the endangered species list. Why?
Well, we've got now have research done that has proven that grazing is actually a benefit to the sage grouse. And once again, ESA has been used in the past as a way to stop things. And so, we continue to try and push for reform of ESA to where common sense takes over. And when we are a benefit to a species, that needs to be brought out and not automatically uh, labeled livestock raising as detrimental to sage grouse, because in reality, the research has shown it's just the opposite. And you look at the anecdotal history, and when sage grouse numbers were highest is probably when livestock numbers in the West were at their highest numbers. The other part of that is predation was there weren't very many predators left because they had done away with them. So, it's trying to look at the whole picture is what we need to do, and not just focus on this is good, this is bad, and get away from ideological decisions and go back to common sense and saying, there's room for everything out here. It's how we balance it, and and I think we'll continue to push on that. We will continue to push that grazing is good. I think we're gaining some ground there, but it's kind of baby steps, and I guess if you looked at it from a Public Lands Council standpoint, maybe it's job security. We're always going to have the challenges there.
Well, there's plenty of issues out here in the West to discuss, and as you well know, Mr. Roeber, cuss a little bit too.
Yeah, that's right.
Whether it's at these meetings amongst ourselves as cattle producers and sheep producers, or having some lively discussions with some of our friends in those federal agencies. Truly, most of the industry is trying to work towards a common goal, and that's to keep multiple use exactly that, multiple use, which includes livestock. On my way down to Grand Junction today, I was reading some of the blogs on the Public Lands Council's website, and I read yours, and one of the headlines that struck me, Mark, was ranching more than just a cowboy. What do you mean by that?
Well, ranching, we like to think of it as kind of like the Sonny and Cher song, ride, that's all I ever do is ride. Cowboys work is never done. Well, that part's true. Cowboys work is never done because besides just riding, you've got all these meetings to go to defend your profession and try and make it better for future generations. And it takes public involvement, and I kind of encourage the younger generation to start stepping forward. I mean, I've gone through tenure as a county commissioner. I actually ran for the state house. I serve on several different boards besides just Public Lands Council. I'm on BLM RAC. I'm on River District Board. And every part of it is important to the profession as a whole. So you wear multiple hats, and I think it's important to make that an important part of your life, to give back to the industry that's gave us such a good life and a great lifestyle. And I mean, but there is more to it. It's trying to promote and protect that, and the Western way of life. I mean, these small towns, small communities of the wide open West, when the federal lands were set aside, they were really set aside to try and stabilize economies in the West. And livestock has always been a major part of that, and needs to continue to do so.
Yeah, well said. And I just kind of want to wrap up by having you talk a little bit about the experience these past couple of years in serving as the Public Lands Council's national president. At the end of this meeting here in Grand Junction, you'll hand the reins over to another Coloradan, Tim Canterbury. But talk about the experience and what it's been like these past couple of years as PLC president, and of course all the years leading up to these past couple of years, because there's a lot of years serving on the officer team and the PLC board of directors, and now it's all coming to a head, so to speak, here this week.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I've had 30 years of working for this industry in various roles. I think I first started going to Public Lands Council during rangeland reform of '94. So, I've been around a while. I've kind of come in and out, but it's been nothing but an honor for me, and to be named as president and be able to serve. That's it's been nothing but an honor. Of course, the best thing about it all is the people you meet and you work with. And there's nothing better than American agriculture, the true salt of the earth out there, and the people and relationships you made. Uh, I treasure, I will treasure that till the day I die. And they're lasting friendships, and like I say, it's been nothing but an honor. I think I told him this morning, start of our board meeting, it has been an honor, and I'm not going away. I will continue to work. All they got to do is call, but I'm not going to be in their way. But I will continue to serve and do what I can and take those baby steps forward and bring a little bit of history along with it. So I'm not going away, but I truly cherish what I have been able to do. So, I don't really know what else to say. I've been on the road a lot. I've got to see a lot of places and got to meet a lot of people, both in the West and in DC, develop some relationships that I wouldn't have got the opportunity to without serving this industry. So I cherish it.
Well, on behalf of everybody watching and listening, and of course that are part of America's federal lands grazing and ranching and just production agriculture in a whole, thank you.
Thank you, Russ.
Yep.
I appreciate the coverage that you guys give us, and it's always a pleasure talking with you. So
Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely. Again, we've been visiting with Mark Roeber, the Public Lands Council's president from Paonia, Colorado, here at the PLC's annual meeting underway this week in Grand Junction, Colorado. Again, for all the details about the PLC and some of those other important policy issues they're working on your behalf every single day in states out here in the West, more importantly, though, back in Washington, D.C. with those lawmakers, you can always visit them online at publiclandscouncil.org.
We are one of the most experienced in pasture rangeland forage. Honesty, commitment, trust. Many companies use these words. At Ag Risk Advisors, we earn them.
Well, as we continue our coverage from here in Grand Junction, Colorado, at the 2024 Public Lands Council's annual meeting, always fun to run into some old friends and industry leaders at meetings like this one. And certainly no stranger to the livestock industry out here in the West is our guest, Brad Boner from Glen Rock, Wyoming, of course, a rancher there in the Cowboy State, and the current president of the American Sheep Industry Association. And Brad, thank you for joining us. Let's kind of kick things off just talking about this long-term relationship ASI has had with the Public Lands Council and other livestock organizations and why it's so important to public lands ranchers.
First of all, thanks for having me. Appreciate all you do for ag and your media coverage is great. So, but the PLC is huge for our ASI members. 60% of the sheep in the U.S. run on public lands at some point in time. So it's a huge piece of what we do, and really enjoy our collaborative effort, working effort with both NCBA and the National Grazing Lands Coalition to make our money go further, get a bigger bang for our buck through PLC. Great group of people, great staff at PLC, and they're housed in DC, so they're on top of the issues. They have the relationships. It's just been a really great thing for our membership to be a member of PLC and have their input and work to help us keep the the multiple use aspect of public lands working for us.
Well, that's what I was just going to follow up. I mean, I don't think we can stress enough, whether it's to our own or our own audience within the agricultural circles or the general public out there, Brad, just how important it really is to have livestock part of America's federal landscape.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, not only for wildfire control, but it helps us feed this country and clothe this country, and it's a resource that allows us to be food secure and not have to rely solely on or mostly on imported product to feed this country, which would be a horrible thing for us to get to, as a matter of national security.
Well, but even with that all said, it's becoming more and more challenging, isn't it, for public lands ranchers to to utilize that multiple use aspect that is the law of the land, truly. I mean, multiple use includes grazing as we know it today, but it's becoming more and more challenging because of all sorts of reasons. But gosh, here of late, politics and litigation.
Yeah, the current administration, unfortunately, has made it a priority to try to, move away from multiple use on our federal lands, which would be a huge mistake in my opinion. And so, they've really pushed that, and through the conservation rule that they've come out with, try to put conservation on par with the other multiple uses that are in FLPMA. And it's just unfortunate that I think we have 40 years of great building these working relationships with these agencies in the agriculture in the West, and really, I think have a great success story there. And what we've done with the resource over the last 30 or 40 years, the resource is better, it's improved the relationship, that we're doing what we need to do to help make the resource better. And then all of a sudden, this administration decides to throw a bomb in the middle of that relationship with the conservation rule, and it just makes it tough. The trust factor starts to go out the window a little bit on both sides. And so it's like rebuilding the relationship all over again, and that's too bad that happened.
And when we talk about rebuilding the relationships, am I wrong in saying, or am I right in saying that we have great relationships with the on-the-ground local BLM, local U.S. Forest Service personnel, at the local level? We're talking about the frustration at those upper end, those upper
Exactly.
management levels, like you said, in Washington, D.C. I mean, because those men and women that are, in places like Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, the rest of the West, I mean, they're part of our rural communities too, and they truly are our friends.
Yeah, and that's why the collaborative effort in the last 30 years has worked, is because everybody ends up with a goal the same. The goals are the same. The way we get to the goals may be a little bit different, but the goals end up being the same. Everyone wants improvement in the resource, right? And so it's worked great. But then all of a sudden, we have an administration that wants to be heavy-handed on the top end and not go through the process from the ground up, and maybe has an agenda. I don't know what the real motive is, but obviously there's an agenda there, and so it's real unfortunate, because those are the people on the ground that you deal with every day are the ones that have made the improvements. Yeah. And working with the Western ranchers, that working relationship has improved the resource, and now all of a sudden we're just bypassing those folks and having it come from DC, who apparently knows all, and is all and knows all, and kind of like the guy in the Wizard of Oz, behind the curtain, kind of that guy.
That's right. Yeah, a good analogy for sure. But it's all the more reason why we need to have organizations like ASI, Public Lands Council, NCBA, so many others that are part of PLC that are working on these important legislative policy items truly every day. I mean, it's busy enough on our farms and ranches to have our heads always in what's going on, but these guys, they really do. I mean, they're working on Capitol Hill, members of Congress, the federal agencies, and can you imagine where public lands ranching would be without representation like PLC?
No, it would just be like a freight train running over the top of us all the time. And so, because the facts are on our side every time. It's just we have, people with an agenda that want to for whatever reason, want to change the facts or change the issue. But when it comes down to the facts, we win every time because we've done a great job securing that resource and making it better, and with the help of the local agency people. It's been a win-win. It's a great success story in my opinion. And so, yeah, as these, as DC rotates in and out of these new administrations, it's great to have the people there that know what they're talking about and can educate them on what's going on. And if we weren't there educating them, it'd be bad.
Well, whether it's a public lands council, Brad, or the American Sheep Industry Association, a big legislative policy right now and into the future for ranchers, both on private lands and public lands, is trying to get some sort of reform to the Federal Endangered Species Act. I know it's an uphill climb regardless of who's in the White House, who controls the Senate, who controls the House, but it truly is something that needs to happen sooner than later. Otherwise, we're going to have these animal activist groups and truly these predators like wolves, mountain lions, grizzly bears just running over the top of us.
Yeah, I think the grizzly bear issue, as we study that, is a perfect example of what you're saying. I mean, the species has been proven to be recovered for 25 or 30 years now, and yet every time we try to list it, we get sued, or unlist it, get it off the list, we get sued. And so it's a perfect example of how the Endangered Species Act is no longer doing what its original intent was. I think there's no argument on that even from the environmental side. We haven't had hardly any recovered species to go off the list. Why is that? Well, it's because of politics and agendas. And so, yeah, there needs to be some reform there. Our senator from Wyoming, Senator Barrasso, has been working on this for a long time, and others as well, many others. And so there needs to be something happen there.
Just kind of want to wrap up because we've been talking a lot about some important issues that are impacting ranchers out here in the West, and too many times than not, when it comes to federal lands ranchers, we get caught up in litigation from these environmental animal activist groups, and unfortunately, what they're finding now is they can't win when sound science is on our side or in the courtroom. So now they're taking their issues to the ballot box. And let's talk about Colorado's ballot initiative 309, which would ban meat processing facilities within Denver's city limits, which would specifically target Superior Farms and have a huge impact on the U.S. lamb industry. And how dangerous that is, Brad, if that were to pass come this November, not just for Colorado, but really for the entire West in America.
Well, all this comes down to the activist side of our population, and this in particular, animal activists who don't think we should be eating meat and all those kinds of things, and we can have that conversation, but at the end of the day, we got to feed people, right? And if we don't have a food supply, things get bad in a hurry. But yeah, it's just doesn't take very many signatures to get on a ballot initiative, especially in the city of Denver, and this is a really bad thought out one that goes away from everything that our consumers want, like local food, want to know where our food comes from, all those kinds of things. This goes completely away from that, and just a real ill thought out initiative that hopefully we can get a nail in the coffin of it.
Yeah, and I just kind of want to wrap up this thought on that ballot initiative 309 in Colorado, and get the word out, because too many times than not, those who want something like this to pass are very creative in how they write the language on the ballot. So if you don't know what you're doing or how you're going to vote, you'll go into that ballot box thinking you want to vote one way, but you end up voting the wrong way because how it's written. So please explain to all of us, Brad, how those of us that don't want that ballot initiative 309 to pass here in Colorado, how we should, how that language is written so we vote correctly.
Yeah. So the language is written that we want you to vote no. It's stop the ban, and so it's a no vote on 309. And part of the campaign slogans will be stop, vote no on 309. And so Well, so we really appreciate a no vote from everyone on 309.
And of course, just allow you a little bit of time here to promote your own convention coming up in January. These issues we've talked about and a whole lot more are going to be talked about at the ASI convention, headed for somewhere sunny in 2025. So if you want to ditch the cold here in the North Country, tell us where we're going to go and where we can go for more information.
Come join us in Scottsdale at the Scottsdale Resort. It's a great property and a great time of year to be out of the north and into the south. And so, yeah, come join us there January 15th through the 18th. And we'd love to see everyone there.
Perfect. Well, as always, we appreciate all that you're doing as the American Sheep Industry Association's president from Glen Rock, Wyoming. Brad, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Russell.
Again, just one of the many guests and newsmakers here in Grand Junction, Colorado this week for the 2024 Public Lands Council annual meeting. Well, during these national conventions, like this week's National Public Lands Council annual meeting here in Grand Junction, Colorado, there's never, ever a lack of issues to talk about when it comes to U.S. agriculture, in this case more specifically, the U.S. livestock industry and those ranchers who utilize America's public lands for grazing. Now, joining us now is Ellie Brighton. She's a policy lead for two groups back in Big Sky country, the Montana Public Lands Council, as well as the Montana Stock Growers Association. And Ellie, why is it so important for the Montana PLC, as well as MSGA, to have representation here on the national level?
Well, it's hugely important because a lot of the issues that we discuss on the national level affect us in Montana. So throughout the country, there's a lot of issues that overlap a lot of states, but there's also issues that are really specific to specific regions. And I really feel like Montana kind of encompasses almost all of them. Pretty much everything we talk about affects Montana. So it's super important that someone's here to hear that information from people in DC and around the West and bring it back to Montana, and conversely take what we're talking about in Montana, the conversations we're having, and bringing it back to a national level as well.
Well, it truly is a grassroots organization. Like you mentioned, ideas, plans can come from states like Montana, bring it to the national level, throw it in front of the whole PLC executive board, and maybe walk away with an important piece of policy that eventually becomes, policy that PLC visits with members of Congress on, or the different agencies, who, regardless of who's in the White House.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, that's a huge part of what PLC does is work with agencies and Congress, because that is how our government works. So it doesn't really matter who's where, we're working with them regardless, because we have to, because it affects ranching no matter what's going on.
A big one here of late has been the BLM's new public lands rule, which kind of caught a lot of public lands ranchers off guard, because I think the industry, and I think those that submitted comments, maybe were expecting a slightly different outcome, because they'd been working as a team, they thought. But anyways, it is out, and now there's some different things going on with it. Why is there some red flags with the BLM's new public lands rule?
Well, I think there's a few. One of the biggest ones was just kind of how it came about. It kind of felt like it came out of nowhere. There wasn't necessarily the collaboration, like you mentioned, that producers had been feeling when this rule was announced. And so I think that caught people really off guard. I think that was the first red flag. And then the second biggest piece that everybody talks about all the time is elevating conservation to be another multiple use equal to grazing, mining, timber, whatever else. So that is a red flag, because conservation can mean non-use. And there's also not really a great definition for it, and so I think it depends on who's trying to implement it, who's trying to hold the conservation lease, how they're going to want to do that. And I think producers were and are, and rightfully so, concerned that that is going to become more of a priority than actually using the land and following the multiple use mandate that BLM is supposed to follow. Because so many ranchers in the West rely on their BLM grazing permits to run the cattle that they need to run their ranches. This could have a huge impact.
Well, it really could. There's, rightfully so, a lot of folks are nervous. Think about it. Like this year, we're celebrating the 90th anniversary of the Taylor Grazing Act, which basically laid it all out for ranchers out here in the West to utilize America's public lands for grazing of cattle and sheep, and to have the same equal footing as other multiple users.
Yeah. And grazing works well. I mean, we know grazing works well with other uses. It is compatible with many, many other things, including conservation, but not necessarily non-use conservation, right? You can't have non-use and grazing at the same time. It doesn't work. So I think that's another part is ranchers feel like we are conserving the land by grazing it. We are taking care of it. And so why is this another piece that needs to come in that may affect how we do our jobs and conserve the land at the same time?
Hey, give our audience a little update on the BLM's recent announcement on solar development on public lands and how that's all going to play with livestock grazing and other multiple users.
That's a great question. I don't know what's going to happen. The BLM came out and said that they had finalized their programmatic environmental impact statement, and this final plan actually is a higher acreage. I think it's almost double the proposed acreage from earlier this year. So what they did, instead of following the alternatives and choosing one that they had analyzed originally, they hodgepodged them together. And so this ends up creating, like I said, more acreage than they'd ever even considered or analyzed in the original document. And it also kind of means that we didn't necessarily get to comment on the exact things that they're trying to implement. So, for example, they expanded the criteria. So solar development is eligible 15 miles from a transmission line, where originally it was only 10 miles from a transmission line. Well, naturally, that expands the potential acreage. They also did some things where they said, you could have either or criteria present instead of both criteria having to be present, which again expands the acreage. So the plan in and of itself brings solar development to the additional 6 northwestern states that it wasn't a part of originally. So now it's the whole 11 western state area is eligible for solar development if the land fits certain criteria.
Well, let's wrap things up today, Ellie, talking about wildlife issues out here in the West. There's never a lack of those, whether it's sage grouse or wolves. But here of late, in states like Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, and of course Washington State, the grizzly bear has been in the headlines. And talk to that and just why it's so important that hopefully sooner than later we get some meaningful Endangered Species Act reform.
Well, the grizzly bear is a large predator, a large predator issue for all those states that you mentioned. And we're hoping to see ESA reform in different forms, but also see the grizzly bear removed from the endangered species list. I don't know if that's going to happen. There's studies going on. There was a 12-month review that Fish and Wildlife was doing. They've pushed off the announcement of all of that until next January, which I'm not sure on the exact timeline. I think it makes it 1.5 or 2 years instead of just 12 months. So at this point, until we know what comes out in January, I don't know what we're going to see. But it's huge for producers because it's a huge issue for cattle health, cattle safety, stress, weight, all of those things that are true with wolves, coyotes, bobcats, any other predator.
Well, truly, these are just a few of the issues that are being covered this week here at the Public Lands Council's annual meeting in Grand Junction, Colorado. Again, power comes in numbers, so if you're not a member of PLC, please consider doing so. Today you can learn more by visiting publiclandscouncil.org. And of course, a big shout out to our sponsor, Ag Risk Advisors, for providing this week's coverage and for providing sponsorship of this On the Road segment. Learn more by visiting agriskadvisors.com. From Grand Junction, Colorado, I'm Russell Nemetz.
Western Ag Network on the road in Grand Junction, Colorado for the Public Lands Council annual meeting. Brought to you by Ag Risk Advisors.